Ann H. Phillips, 308 27th Street. Mention was made at the last council meeting about receiving a grant from the state for flood mitigation and using part of it for a survey of Brigantine's privately owned bulkheads and the lack of the same. We've commented on this issue before because of the importance of these bulkheads to public safety. If my understanding of this is incorrect, please clarify what was said at that previous meeting. Otherwise, please answer the following two questions. Number one, why isn't it part of the job of the city engineer to survey, annually at least, the status and condition of all of Brigantine's bulkheads and of bayfront properties without them, and making that report available to those in government who should have it, that information, and the public? Apparently, there isn't now such a report. It shouldn't be the responsibility of neighbors to complain about problems with bulkheads or whatever condition they are in order to have the issue addressed. Two, the effectiveness of taxpayer-funded flood mitigation is weakened by problems with privately owned bulkheads and by bayfront properties without them. The legal issue of the missing bulkheads remains to be addressed. It shouldn't affect another important aspect of this matter, that of bulkheads in disrepair, useless because of lack of maintenance and enforcement of the ordinance. We do have a bulkhead ordinance, and that states, quote, all private bulkheads must be maintained in such a manner so the same aren't injurious or dangerous to the health, safety, and welfare of Brigantine's residents. Those in violation of the ordinance are subject to a fine or jail time. Bulkheads should be constructed, repaired, or reconstructed to certain listed specifications, unquote. Based on residents' observations, we do have bulkheads that are in disrepair in violation of our ordinance. The question, why isn't the law being enforced? So please comment on my comments and questions, please.
Ms. Phillips, I'll start and I'll ask, I think the question was asked of our city engineer about what is being looked at in terms of elevation of bulkheads. And I think the question then went into the condition of the bulkhead. So I'll let Mr. Stinson answer.
Okay,
because
just one clarification.
we can't have dialogue, you know that.
Well,
So
we just had a dialogue between the person.
Well, we're trying to stay to the rules that we have.
Oh, well, they only affect me?
Well, no, they don't. But I'm trying, let Mr. Stinson answer first, if you would.
Oh, no, but I think you're asking the wrong question. That's why I wanted to clarify what you're saying.
Well, that's why I told you early on we need to have dialogue.
Well, since we seem to have gotten a feel tonight on that that previous recommendation.
Well, let me try and give you the answer to the question I think you're asking, and then we'll move on from there.
No, the question is the money to pay for the study of the bulkheads. My point is, shouldn't that be part of the job of the city engineer? My recollection from the previous meeting, and this is what I said at the beginning, was that part of this money in this grant was to help pay for that survey. My point is, why should we use money from the grant when this should be part of the job of the city engineer and done on a regular basis? Because we do have bulkheads. We know they're missing bulkheads. There are also those that are in disrepair, which are certainly not serving the purpose. So that's my question, and I don't think that's the direction you were going.
Well, I'm going to try and answer your question, and then I'm going to try and clear up what was stated at the previous meeting. Given the scope of what the city engineer has had to do post-Sandy and all the work that he is doing with all of the major projects that are in place, I don't know, and I'm not an engineer, and I don't know how the city engineer structures his day. I don't think at this particular time that the city engineer would have time to survey every bulkhead in the city of Brigantine. With that said, there is a process in place that they do respond to complaints about bulkheads because I've received them and I've passed them on. But along with that, there is a process in place when construction occurs that bulkheads have to be replaced if the construction amount is over 50% of the value of that particular structure. So major addition, renovation from Sandy, these are all triggering new bulkhead replacements, and you're seeing a lot of them happen throughout the island. But what was said about the survey, I think they're looking at two things. What is the elevation of those bulkheads? And to a lesser degree, I guess, what is the condition of those bulkheads?
That is correct. And the survey that we're talking about came from our strategic recovery planning report, which was developed by our committee. And the committee recognized the importance of the bulkhead in our flood prevention efforts. So that report identified the need to inventory the bulkheads, particularly for elevation. But it was discussed also that there'd be an opportunity when that work is being done, when the elevations are being taken for the private bulkheads, to note any obvious disrepair, structural conditions of the bulkhead. So the Strategic Recovery Committee identified that as a need and of importance for the city. So we put it in the report. We received a grant now from the state that gives us a leg up, a good head start. So maybe once that report is done, the primary goal, at least for me, is to obtain the elevations of the bulkheads, particularly in the areas where we are disputing FEMA's flood elevations or the elevations on the firm maps. So I need that information to go back to FEMA and have an intelligent dialogue with some substance to argue our point in lowering or changing the flood zone, particularly the V zone that we know about on Bayshore Avenue. The secondary benefit is then that we can inventory and get an idea of how many bulkheads we have at elevation 9 and how many bulkheads we have that are below that elevation. So then when we discuss with our bulkhead committee at the time, we discussed whether or not we wanted to raise the height requirements for our bulkheads. We would have an idea whether the barn doors were already open and 60-70% of our bulkheads are already replaced to 9. So really, where's the benefit of changing that to 10? Or maybe it's different, but at least we would have some data to use in that discussion. And then we talked about, let's while this work is being done, let's find out if there's obvious problems, structural problems with the bulkheads, so that then, again, I would have a good starting point to enforce the ordinance. And quite frankly, I do not have the time right now to go inventory every bulkhead. I don't have the means right now to survey the elevation of every bulkhead. We have an opportunity by way of a grant to have that work done and a comprehensive report and a very good starting point from which then I can focus on the areas that need to be repaired, and I can do inspections on those areas as opposed to doing an annual inspection citywide.
And Mrs. Phillips, if I could also interject, and certainly it's important to have bulkheads that are structurally sound and that they are at the higher elevation, and that will happen over time. And it should happen faster, I agree with you, in certain areas. But the work that Ed Stinson's doing right now with the data he is receiving, I'm not sure if everyone understands how important that is. You still have a pretty good section of Bayshore Avenue that is in the V zone. And what that means to those homeowners is that the construction type that they have right now is not in compliance. Their flood insurance rates will be astronomical, and the value of their properties will be decreased. With the data that we've had so far, not just this data, but other data, the preliminary work that's been done, we started with over 2,000 properties in the V zone. We're down to 17 at this point. The remaining 17, in order to get that V-zone removed and to have really what is a logical designation on the flood insurance map, he has to have that data. But also, I have to tell you that he has had meetings with the people who are making the maps, and having the data in front of you is the most important thing right now. The condition of those bulkheads is important, but having that data is extremely important. And I have to also tell you that the meetings that he went into with the map makers, they're not happening everywhere. They happened because I asked Congressman Loviando to intercede, which he did. And he brought the map makers here, the people who are working on that project, to meet with the engineer with that data he has already, but any data going forward will only help the cause. So yes, I agree with you. We need to have bulkheads that are in good condition. I get complaints from people. I know the engineer's office and the building office go out and respond to those complaints. But there's also a financial issue. You have people, and this is what Mr. Cerny dealt with when he looked at the bulkhead ordinance. We could probably, at some point, if we decide to go in that direction, put a bulkhead on a property that does not have a bulkhead, no bulkhead at all, and then lien that property going forward. But there's a financial cost either way. It's either to the homeowner or it's to the residents and taxpayers of the city of Brigantine. Some people just don't have the money to put a bulkhead in right now, or if we do it, we can lien the property and get paid at a future date. Either way, it's going to cost someone.
May I say something?
Sure.
I get the impression that doing a survey has not been a policy of this government over the years, because we seem to be looking at them with a fresh eye. The ordinance was passed, and yet there has evidently been no systematic enforcement of that ordinance. And the fact that the engineer has obviously been busy with Sandy and its other aspects would seem to me to just emphasize again that bulkheads are part of looking at that, as what Sandy did. And I don't get the impression yet that this should be something that's done on a regular basis, and that enforcement should not be based on complaints from the neighbors. It should be part of an ongoing survey that takes place at least annually. We're not such a huge island that I think it's certainly possible to keep better track of things than has been done, obviously, in the past. And the fact that there are pieces that, bulkheads that are missing, and that it appears that legally that municipalities would have difficulty in trying to impose such construction, that's aside from having a survey done on a regular basis. You're getting the data. Evidently, there hasn't been much data in the past. And I think that's a problem.
There hasn't been a need for data in the past. We haven't had Sandy in the past.
No. We've had other storms, and bulkheads are there, and there are storms of different intensity, but it isn't just because of Sandy. This is something that is an island we should have been conscious of and focusing on for years.
Ms. Phillips, I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you look at our bulkhead ordinance.
Yeah, I did.
Well, compare it to other communities. Brigantine's had one of the best bulkhead ordinances probably of any of the coastal communities. In fact, in Cape May County, they're still having the debate of putting the bulkheads at elevation 7, where we've had elevation 9 probably since the 80s. So it's, once again, I understand you're fixated at this point on the inspection process, but I can tell you that operationally, this is the way that it has been handled through the building inspector and the engineer's office. We have a full-time engineer now for a little over 2 years, but we have also had a superstorm for almost 2 years, in the wake of a superstorm for 2 years. I don't know whether it's physically possible to go out and survey bulkheads every year, whether or not it's feasible or even warranted. How much are they going to change from one year to the next? Be honest with you, Mr. Stinson can probably tell you, if they're at elevation 7, most of them probably need to be replaced.
All it takes is one bulkhead in disrepair to do a great deal of damage. So therefore, I think we need to concentrate. I'm not saying at the moment, try to force people. I think something legally needs to be done, because you force people to take down trees, you force them to put up sidewalks because of public safety. Well, bulkheads certainly are part of public safety to a larger extent than these other factors.
I think your time is up, Mrs. Phillips.
Yes, thank you.
But
Mayor, may I add one thing? And this is somewhat in response to Mrs. Phillips and Mrs. Livesey with regards to the bulkhead. And I'd like to encourage everyone not to get fixated on the elevation aspect of the bulkheads. We know, we're going to get flooded. We're on a barrier island. Flooding is going to occur. That's why we're focusing on our rebuilding efforts to build stronger. We're focusing on our preparedness, our first alert, and those measures so that we can be better prepared. We can evacuate. That's where really we need to focus. The bulkhead maintenance, although again, council back sometime in the 80s adopted a minimum height requirement for the bulkhead of elevation 9. It was, a relatively arbitrary number. And other communities, they have 7, they have 5, they have maximum elevations, not minimum elevations. So the maintenance of the bulkhead, the purpose, the way I see that ordinance, is not to drive elevation 9, although that's a secondary function. It's to protect the land so that you don't have property eroding out into the bay that then erodes onto your neighbor's property that jeopardizes your structure or jeopardizes the neighbor's structure. That's the idea. So we are looking at the elevations because we're talking about changing the ordinance, changing the height requirements. We know we have a benefit. We get a buffer because we have that higher bulkhead for most of the island. But there are places that don't have bulkheads. Along Lagoon Boulevard in the south end don't have bulkheads. So we're going to flood. And we really, we're going to do everything we can with respect to enforcing the bulkhead ordinances, enforcing the elevation requirements, and determining what is the best elevation really for us, to protect us, to give us that buffer. But really we should emphasize the building stronger, the paying attention to the storms, to the emergency management messages, evacuate when you can. That's how we're going to protect our goods, our families, and the island.
Thank you, Ed. Any other, yes, Mr. Makosi.